The architecture of a software artifact is its description in terms of all of its components and the interfaces among the components. If you want to propose any of the methods, that has to be instituted with appropriate architectural diagram. The architecture diagram must specify the overall details of the proposed method. PS1, PS2, PS3, PS4, PS5, all these are called as the framework. Hello and warm welcome to one and all. It is Dr. Ravikumar YB, Department of Computer Science, Vidhyaashram, First Grade College, MYSURU, the Temple of Excellence. In today's session, you will be taught about the software engineering documentation models. That is, the documentation models which have been explained in the previous sessions will be continued in today's session. That is, which includes the overall software documentation models, that is the different phases in which you will come across the types of documentations are explained in today's sessions. If that is the case, software engineering is still a very young field compared to others such as civil engineering or mechanical engineering. And of course, we have that priority over the other engineering fields. Whether it can be thinkable to build a bridge or a new car model without properly describing its components? Yes, of course. Without properly thinking over that, it is not at all possible to build a bridge or to build a car, manufacture a car. So the thinking is very, very important. So in this case, we have to incorporate certain important type of thinking or analysis methodologies here to incorporate it in the form of documentation. So, and to proceed immediately to build its bits and pieces, thinking to put them together afterwards without a real design and assembly plan. So, no. So why do we do it in software? So without any plan, it is not at all possible to proceed ahead. So in this way, we are going to think, analyze, design, document, and all those things are carried out. So there are several standards defined by the main software engineering institutes, but the purpose here is to highlight very briefly the characteristics of the different documents and not to present all the details. That is the abstraction. The standards defined by the software engineering institutes will not give the complete details of that. Instead, they'll give you the brief information of that, because the software engineering institutes may be a companies or any of the companies which takes the orders or requests from the clients and processes their requests to meet their requirements. If you look at this, you will clearly understand the V model, that is the life cycle of the V model, which includes the requirement analysis, then architectural design, detailed design, implementation, wherein you will not find any documentation here. Then we have a unit testing here, which is related to the implementation part, which includes the documentation. Then integration testing. Then we have a validation testing. Once it is developed, the product is given to the project management team, configuration management, and infrastructure. So we have these types of modules that require the efficiency. They expect the efficiency of this software project in the form of documentation, because every development of a software requires a documentation. So this documentation plays a very significant role in the development of the software while delivering it to the client. So the requirements documents include, that is, right from the beginning, the first phase, that is requirements analysis, till the testing is carried out, we require the documentation purpose. If that is the case, requirements engineering documents, at the time of requirements analysis, how the documents are to be prepared. That is, the requirements documents must describe the product, the functionalities and the qualities expected, which is going to be developed. The wrong requirements will give the wrong product. Fuzzy requirements will cause constant instability and the changes. That means what? If you do the plan properly and the documentation properly, then the product will be perfect. Product will be delivered to the client. Otherwise, that leads to an improper product. So in order to capture all aspects of the product, the requirements are usually separated in the functional requirements, design requirements, and operational requirements. Three types. The first one is functional requirements. The functional requirements includes the features, deliverables, logics, documents, etc. All these are called as the functional requirements. What about the design requirements? That is done by the internal documentation, which includes quality, portability, performance, etc. All these are related to the internal documentation. Operational requirements, which includes the maintenance, security, support, and all those things, are called as the operational requirements. So these are the three important type of requirement specifications, documentation specified at the time of requirements analysis. Then requirements documentation handled by the user who require a unique identifier, then a description that must be unambiguous and clearly stated. Third one, attributes that complete the description, such as priority, example source, how to test the requirements, is its acceptance criteria, etc. Everything is handled by the user. That must be done very carefully. Then architecture documents, that means the design architecture documents. Here, the architecture of a software artifact is its description in terms of all of its components and the interfaces among the components. That means if there are different types of modules, how one of the module is going to interact with the other module. That means how the flow of data is going to take place from one of the module to another module. All those description details are considered here. If that is the case, usually the overview is done graphically, but then the details must be specified in detailed text in an architecture document. That means even if you want to propose any of the methods, that has to be instituted with appropriate architectural diagram. The architecture diagram must specify the overall details of the proposed method. That is why we require the architectural documents while developing a software product. So each component must have a unique identifier. That means the modules must be identified by unique identifier, and the description of its functionalities and the decomposition, if necessary, in subcomponents must also be identified carefully. The interfaces, that is the movement of data from one module to another module, are extremely important for obtaining the modular applications, and efficient partitioning of the work in the team and parallel development is the one which is most essentially required in case of the development of software product in terms of the modules. Then architecture documents can also be described in terms of this. If you look at this, the light publisher is the one which is having the control to do all those things. So here PS1. What is this? We have PS2 here. Publisher 3. We have PS4, PS5, Publisher 5. What is this? PS1, PS2, PS3, PS4, PS5. All these are called as the framework. That is Publisher 4, 5, 3, 2, 1, or all called as the work involved in the process of publication of any of the methods, proposed methods. So we have this diagram, the graphic overview of the components and its context. We have the state diagram here. We have the light developer subsystem here. All these ovular shape indicates the subsystems, and these subsystems are associated with the publisher one. That means the documents associated with it are identified in the form of this. Now, detailed design. In the case of detailed design, how the documentation takes place. Once the components are defined, it is necessary to describe all the details of the component, usually for its purpose and analysis and design methodology. For instance, OMT, Booch, UML, Room. For object-oriented modeling, that is OOMD. This indicates object-oriented modeling and design. This includes the architectural diagrams which is involved with the documentation purpose, whether it is a state sequence diagram or it may be any of the diagrams like object diagram or an use case diagram or a sequence diagram. All these are different types of diagrams that represent the description of a software project. So, which is used, and its choice depends on the organization, the project infrastructure, and the language platform chosen. Now, depending on the type of component being developed, these documents usually consist of use cases, as I told you right now, that is scenarios, Then object, yes, I told you right now, that is object and data models, dynamic or logic behavior models, and so on. All these are very, very important types of modeling techniques which we use to design any of the software product in the form of an architectural design or a graphical representation of it. Then moving on to the implementation part, the documents, how it is going to be helpful, that is unit testing is to be carried out. If that is the case, these are the result of favorite activities of every developers, that is coding, debugging, but code is not at all. It must be implementation of the design choice, but adequately commented. I know these things are obvious, but often they are not done. That means the comments are written aside the code. The purpose of that writing the comment is to make them analyze and understand what is the logic of that program. So in order to do that, that is called as a comment. So we do not call it as a documentation. Then for instance, here, please observe here, comment should focus on the difficult parts of the code, not simply parrot easy bytes of code. They should also explain the logic and why such logic is chosen. That means comments are very, very helpful for the developers who analyzes the code written by other personality. That is the reason we require the comments along with the code written in the programming languages. That is during the implementation documents. Then we have testing documents. The product must be tested in order to make sure that it is the product we wanted to obtain. Usually, the test documents are done in parallel with coding. Unit testing with coding, as I told you right now. And they use as input the requirements and the design documents. Requirements and design documents are used as input for the purpose of implementation. But while developing the implementation, they will not write any documentation. Instead, they will do the comments along with the code associated with it. But unit testing is also carried out by the same developer. So unit testing is done by the developer who performs the testing. Unit testing will write a documentation that is called as the testing documentation, which is related to the implementation part. Tests, just like the application, must be studied, designed, and implemented. The same thing here. The implementer who implements the code or the design description defined earlier in the earlier phases of the software development lifecycle. If that is the case, test documents. Usually, the minimal set of tests are a test plan that describes the global strategy, features, and test modules are called as the test strategies. Then test cases. Each case verifying a feature of a component with all the commands needed to run the test and how to set up the test environment. Then test reports, which present the results of the execution of the individual tests. So here they'll give input to the modules and they will give the input with the different types of test cases, that is possible type of test inputs. Once it is verified, they will generate a report on the test which is conducted. Project management documents. What is the meaning of project management documents? The project manager is the one who manages all these projects by assigning it to different teams. If that is the case, a project plan with the task description, resource allocation, and dependencies must be done. Then project scheduling, when the project is to be started, when it is started, and when it has to be completed. All those scheduling tasks are done, and tracking of documents with progress status, Gantt chart, and milestone trend charts. All these are the important type of graphical representation that describes the time required to complete the project. Then regular project reports, both for the team members and for the project customers. This is also very, very important in case of documentation with the development of a software product. Then configuration management document. This is the last type of management. In this case, the configuration management documents describe all configuration items of the project, every artifact. Suppose if there is any mistake, that has to be clearly indicated in that of the project phases and activities, requirements, design, code, test, that is different phases of the software development, and what is the artifact that they have identified in that, everything must be clearly indicated in that. They also describe the repository where all these documents are stored and how they can be modified and how they are versioned and released. That is, different versions of the software are developed and released to the market is the type of importance here. Then project infrastructure document. The project infrastructure documents are a set of documents that are different for different roles in the project. Project infrastructure management includes the infrastructure, the documentation infrastructure, and so on. The person who does the documentation will also be included into the team so that the description of that particular module is described while implementing the design descriptions in the form of coding. So basically, they describe how to participate in the project in a given role. The same thing here. Therefore, they contain information such as all the conventions of the project, that is, the design descriptions used in it, and which tools to use the project and how they are used. Everything must be incorporated in the project with the help of the team member who has involved in the conversation with the requirements analysis phase. That means the team leader is the one who discusses with the other modules, team members, and the work assigned to him is discussed with his team members. Then project infrastructure document includes templates and methodologies to follow. What has to be the template? Then recommended reading for the project members, that is team members. How to use the configuration system, that is, there are different configurations and these configurations must be handled very carefully while implementing. And how to report the progress of the project to manager, and another practical needs within the project. Any other thing which they want to discuss with the project manager can do so. User software documentation. That means once it is delivered to him, that becomes a manual for the user. He has to go through the manual and work according to the instructions specified in the manual. That means user software documentation. User documentation is not necessarily made of paper. It is all the information that is presented to the user, that is manuals. Please see here. System or error messages, online help, websites, comments in the code, examples, multimedia tutorials, etc. But please note that the complete detailed information is not given to him. The information which is relevantly required for him to operate the software product is given in the manual. So please observe this carefully here. Engineer's viewpoint is this good product, that is with poor documents. But user views, he just gives the brief information to the developer, but he has to go through the documents and it has to be implemented in the form of, as such, it becomes the good product to the client or to the users. User software documentation includes bad documentation and good documentation, which is discussed in the previous session. Let me re-explain the same thing here because it is very much essential for this documentation purpose, software engineering documentation purpose. Bad documentation, that is engineer-centered, inappropriate layouts and fonts too wordy, all those leads to an inefficient delivery of the software product. Whereas in case of good documentation, which is task-oriented and user-centered and different formats and fonts, they will maintain a standard font sizes, standard formats and font sizes are followed here at different user level. For example, if there is an admin, he will be given certain privileges with certain fonts. Certain texts are highlighted in the bold and certain texts are highlighted in the normal text. All those details are given with certain standards of formats and fonts within it. Elements of good documentation includes structured writing with heading, small blocks, list sequences. As I told you in the previous slides, that is with headings, small blocks, that is list sequence, that is bullets, and all those things are mentioned there. Flowcharts to show graphically the structure and the behavior of the product and how the data flows from one module to another module, and all those must be represented in the form of a flowchart so that the user who goes through the use of product will be able to analyze what is the principle of that particular software which is developed for him. Then trees and graphs to show the structure of the data. As I told you, how it moves from one module to another module, all those things can be represented in the form of a pictorial representation, in the form of a data structure like trees and graphs. lots of examples and play scripts that the user can use. As such, they understand and proceed in the practice. The same thing. Once it is delivered to him, he has to be represented with these details, so that by going through the graphical or pictorial representation of it, he will be able to operate the software product very well. Plenty of pictures and screen dumps to show, for instance, how to use the graphic interfaces. That is, wherein he has to fill in the form. That is, in the place of text box, he has to fill in the appropriate text. In the case of mobile number field, he has to insert only the mobile number, not the text information. So all those detailed information must be specified in the user manual, that is in the documentation. In the IPT group at CERN, we have written many documents using the stop method and have experienced how positively the user welcomes them. Please see to it. This is an example. Suggestions. This method was invented by Hughes Aircraft Company 1960, and it is widely used in several companies both for internal and external documentation purpose. For example, NCR, Texas Instruments, IBM and others are following the same structure of the format. That is, both internal documentation and external documentation are very, very essential and important for the delivery of the good software product to client. So they will maintain all these standards of documentation. This method has several advantages for readers, and it is very simple. That is, break the information you want to convey into 2-page components, wherein one concept per component, then text on the left, 500 words, and graphics on the right, both explaining the same concept. That means text on one side and graphic which is corresponding to this text must be written here, so that he will clearly understand what has to be done in that. In fact, every time the reader turns the page, he disconnects and reconnects to the book. That is, normal books very often interrupt the reader's attention even in the middle of the explanation. So, in order to make him understand what is written in the user manual, all these principles must be followed. It is with this method, every time a page is turned, a concept is completed and a new one arrives. That is the thing. Text and graphics information are using different parts of our brain, and some readers prefer one of the two types of presentation. By providing both forms, we satisfy all kinds of audience, so that the person who reads it will be able to clearly understand what is there in that. So with this, I'm going to conclude this session. Thank you very much. Thank you one and all. That is software engineering documentation, which gives you the overall description in which phases, which type of documents are used and how these documentations are helpful from one phase to the another phase. That is, while moving on from requirements analysis to the design phases, how the documentations are used. That is, at the time of implementation, how the documentations proceeds from analysis, that is from design phases to the implementation phase. All those documentations must be maintained, and it has played a significant role in the software industry. So we recommend you to perform or maintain a good documentation that leads you to the delivery of efficient software product. With this, I am going to conclude this session. Thank you very much. Thank you one and all, my dear students.